Sunsets and Saddles by Evelyn Merrick. The hot summer sun beat down on Katherine Morgan's face as she urged her chestnut mare forward along the dusty trail. Perspiration trickled down her neck, dampening the collar of her riding blouse. 3 days on horseback had left her weary, but the promise of a new life kept her spirits high. Behind her lay Philadelphia with its suffocating society rules and the memory of a broken engagement. Ahead lay Cypress Creek and the ranch she had inherited from her uncle. "Not much farther now, Penny," she murmured to her horse, patting the animal's warm neck. As she crested the hill, the valley below spread before her in a tapestry of green and brown. Nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains sat a collection of wooden buildings that made up the town of Cypress Creek. Katherine's chest tightened with anxiety. Would the townsfolk accept a woman rancher from the east? Would she have the strength to run her uncle's property alone? The mare's hooves clattered against the packed dirt of the main street as Katherine rode into town. Men in weathered hats and dusty boots paused to stare at the newcomer. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Katherine sat tall in the saddle, her chin lifted in defiance of their scrutiny. At the general store she dismounted and secured Penny to the hitching post. Her legs trembled after so many hours of riding, but she refused to show weakness. "Miss," a deep voice addressed her as she climbed the steps to the store's porch. "You look like you've come a fair piece." Katherine turned to face a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His black hat was pulled low over his forehead, casting shadows across his handsome features. "I have indeed, sir. I'm Katherine Morgan, Joseph Morgan's niece. I've come to claim my inheritance." The man's expression changed from polite interest to wary assessment. "Matthew Holloway, Sheriff of Cypress Creek?" He touched the brim of his hat. "Your uncle's place has been sitting empty these past 3 months. I came as quickly as I could arrange my affairs." Sheriff Holloway's gaze swept over her city clothes and delicate riding boots. "The Morgan Ranch is no place for a lady alone. It's rough country out there." Katherine bristled. "I assure you, Sheriff, I'm more than capable of managing my own property." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "We'll see about that, Miss Morgan. The Rocking M needs a firm hand, especially with Caleb Jenkins trying to claim water rights to your creek." "Water rights?" Katherine frowned. Uncle Joseph never mentioned any dispute in his letters. "It started after his passing. Jenkins has been eyeing that property for years." The sheriff adjusted his hat. "You might want to consider selling. I know several men who'd pay fair price." "I have no intention of selling, Sheriff Holloway." Something resembling admiration flickered in his eyes. "Then you'd best get yourself settled in. The summer's been dry, and folks get desperate when water runs scarce." Katherine thanked him for the information, though his warning had only strengthened her resolve. She hadn't journeyed across half the country just to surrender at the first sign of trouble. Matthew Holloway watched Katherine Morgan stride into the general store, her back straight as a ramrod despite the weariness evident in her movements. Joseph Morgan's niece was not what he had expected. With her honey-colored hair pulled into a practical bun and determination etched on her delicate features, she appeared both vulnerable and formidable. "That the Morgan girl, Sam Peterson, the blacksmith?" asked as he joined Matthew on the porch. "Yes, seems set on running the ranch herself." Sam chuckled. "She won't last a week. City folk don't understand what it takes." Matthew wasn't so sure. There was steel beneath Katherine Morgan's refined exterior. "We'll see," he replied, thinking of Caleb Jenkins and his hired guns. "Keep an eye on Jenkins and his boys. I don't want trouble." "Jenkins won't take kindly to a woman standing in his way." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Then he'll answer to me." The Rocking M Ranch was in worse condition than Katherine had anticipated. The main house, a sturdy 2-story structure of weathered pine, needed repairs to its sagging porch and leaking roof. The barn's door hung from a single hinge, and the corral fence had collapsed in several places. Katherine stood in the overgrown yard, fighting despair. Her uncle's lawyer had warned her that Joseph hadn't maintained the property well in his final years, but she hadn't expected such desolation. "Miss Morgan," a voice called. Katherine turned to see an older man approaching from the direction of a small cabin set apart from the main house. He walked with a pronounced limp, using a cane to steady himself. "I'm Walter Simmons," he said, extending a weathered hand. "I worked for your uncle for nigh on 15 years. Katherine shook his hand, relief washing over her. "Mr. Simmons, I'm pleased to meet you. I didn't realize anyone was still here." "Your uncle asked me to keep an eye on things until you arrived. Walter gestured toward the property with his cane. "It ain't much to look at right now, but it's good land." "Can it be saved?" Katherine asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Walter's eyes squinted at the corners. "With hard work and determination. The cattle are up in the north pasture, about 60 head. Not a large herd, but healthy stock." For the first time since arriving, Katherine felt a flicker of hope. "Will you stay on, Mr. Simmons? I could use your expertise." "I'd be honored, Miss Morgan. But you should know there's trouble brewing with Caleb Jenkins. He owns the Double J Ranch that borders your property to the west. Been trying to force your uncle to sell for years." "So the sheriff mentioned. What does Jenkins want with my land?" "It's not the land so much as the creek that runs through it. In these parts, water means power." Walter pointed toward the distant hills. "Your creek feeds the valley. Jenkins wants to control it." Katherine nodded, understanding dawning. "Then we must ensure he doesn't get it." Matthew found himself riding out to the Rockingham more often than strictly necessary over the next few weeks. He told himself it was his duty to check on Katherine Morgan's safety, but he knew there was more to it than professional concern. He found her mending the corral fence, her sleeves rolled up and hair escaping its pins. Sweat glistened on her brow as she hammered a nail with more enthusiasm than skill. "You're holding it wrong," Matthew said by way of greeting, dismounting from his horse. Katherine startled, then scowled. "Good afternoon to you too, Sheriff." Matthew took the hammer from her hands, their fingers brushing briefly. Like this, he demonstrated, driving the nail in with 3 precise strikes. "You'll wear yourself out doing it your way." "Thank you for the lesson," she replied, her tone softening. "Have you come with news?" "Just checking in. Jenkins has been quiet, which concerns me more than if he were making threats." Katherine wiped her brow with her sleeve. "Mr. Simmons is teaching me about ranching. Did you know my uncle left 50 acres of prime grazing land untouched because he couldn't manage it all?" Matthew nodded. "Joseph was a good man, but the ranch was too much for him after your aunt passed." "I never met her," Katherine said quietly. "Uncle Joseph wrote about her in his letters. They never had children of their own." "Which is why the ranch comes to you." Matthew studied her face, noting the smudge of dirt on her cheek and the determination in her eyes. "You're making progress here." Pride straightened her shoulders. "We've repaired most of the fences and started work on the roof. Walter says we might be able to expand the herd next spring if all goes well." "You're planning to stay then?" "This is my home now, Sheriff Holloway." She met his gaze unflinchingly. "I'm not running back east with my tail between my legs, if that's what you're asking." Matthew smiled, genuinely impressed. "I never thought you would, Miss Morgan." The summer days lengthened into a rhythm of hard work and small victories for Katherine. Walter proved invaluable, teaching her the business of ranching with patient instruction. She learned to ride Western style, to mend fences, and to understand the subtle signs of the land and weather. The physical labor transformed her body, replacing city softness with lean strength. Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned despite her broad-brimmed hat. And somewhere along the way she fell in love with the ranch, with its vast skies and rugged beauty. Sheriff Holloway, Matthew, as she'd begun to think of him, continued his regular visits. Sometimes he brought supplies from town or news of neighboring ranches. Other times he simply appeared at dusk, joining her on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains. "You've accomplished much in a short time," he remarked one evening as they sat in companionable silence. "We still have much to do before winter," Katherine replied, though pleasure at his compliment warmed her. "The town's holding a dance Saturday next," Matthew said, his voice careful. "Thought you might like to attend, meet some of the local folks." Katherine glanced at him, surprised by the invitation. "Are you asking to escort me, Sheriff?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I reckon I am, Miss Morgan." "Then I accept." Their eyes met, and Katherine felt something shift between them, a current of awareness that had been building since their first encounter. The moment shattered as Walter hobbled onto the porch, his expression grave. "Riders coming," he announced. "Looks like Jenkins and his men." Matthew stood immediately, hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "Stay here," he ordered, striding into the yard to meet the approaching horsemen. Katherine ignored his command, following close behind. 5 riders approached, dust billowing around their horses' hooves. The man in front was barrel-chested with a thick gray beard and small, calculating eyes. "Holloway?" The man acknowledged Matthew with a curt nod. Come to pay my respects to Miss Morgan." "Jenkins," Matthew replied, his stance casual but alert. "Kind of you to wait so long." Caleb Jenkins ignored the sheriff's sarcasm, turning his attention to Katherine. "Miss Morgan, I'm Caleb Jenkins. I was a friend of your uncle's." "Mr. Jenkins," Katherine replied coolly, "I understand you've been interested in my property." Jenkins chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Direct, like your uncle. Yes, I've made offers in the past. I'm prepared to make another, more generous one now. The rocking M is not for sale." Jenkins' smile faded. "You misunderstand the situation, Miss Morgan. This isn't Philadelphia. Out here, a woman alone can't." "She's not alone," Matthew interrupted, his voice hard as flint. Katherine stepped forward. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Jenkins, but as I told the sheriff when I arrived, I have no intention of selling my uncle's ranch." Jenkins studied her for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to the repaired fences and fresh-painted barn. "You've been busy, but ranching takes more than a pretty face and Eastern determination. When the first crisis hits, drought, rustlers, or blizzard, you'll change your mind." "Perhaps," Katherine replied evenly, "but that will be my decision to make." Jenkins' eyes narrowed. "The offer stands until the end of summer. After that, things might get difficult." "Is that a threat, Jenkins?" Matthew's hand rested openly on his pistol now. Jenkins smiled thinly. "Just stating facts, Sheriff. Good day, Miss Morgan." The riders departed in a cloud of dust, leaving tension hanging in the air like the promise of a storm. "He won't give up easily," Walter said, joining them in the yard. Matthew turned to Katherine, his expression serious. "Jenkins is dangerous when crossed. I want you to be careful." Katherine nodded, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. "What will he do?" "Nothing illegal while I'm watching," Matthew replied. "But accidents happen on ranches all the time." The night of the dance arrived with a sense of occasion that surprised Katherine. She had brought few fine clothes from Philadelphia, but she had preserved one special dress, a deep blue creation of silk with modest lace trim. Standing before the small mirror in her bedroom, she barely recognized the woman who looked back at her. Her face was leaner, her complexion honeyed by the sun, her eyes brighter than they had been in years. When Matthew arrived to escort her, his appreciative gaze told her the effort had been worthwhile. "You look beautiful, Katherine," he said, using her given name for the first time. "Thank you, Matthew." She took his offered arm, aware of his freshly shaved face and the faint scent of bay rum. He had exchanged his dusty work clothes for a clean shirt and vest, his badge polished to a shine on his chest. The town hall had been transformed with lanterns and wildflowers. A small band played lively tunes and couples swirled across the wooden floor in time to the music. Katherine felt the stares as they entered, heard the murmurs that followed their passage. Matthew guided her through the crowd, introducing her to ranchers and townspeople alike. Some were welcoming, others reserved, but all seemed curious about the woman who had taken over Joseph Morgan's failing ranch. "Don't mind them," Matthew murmured as they moved away from a particularly frosty shopkeeper's wife. "They'll warm up once they know you." "And if they don't?" Katherine asked, surprising herself with how little the prospect bothered her. Matthew smiled, his blue eyes squinting at the corners. "Then they're fools." He led her onto the dance floor, his hand warm at her waist as they joined the waltz. Katherine had attended countless balls in Philadelphia, but none had affected her like this simple country dance with Matthew's strong arms around her. "You're full of surprises, Sheriff," she said as he guided her expertly through the steps. "Where did a lawman learn to waltz?" "I wasn't always a sheriff," he replied with a mysterious smile. "There's much you don't know about me yet, Miss Morgan." The word yet hung between them, full of promise. The evening progressed pleasantly until Caleb Jenkins arrived with his daughter, a pretty young woman who couldn't be more than 20. Jenkins made a point of approaching them during a break in the dancing. "Miss Morgan, Sheriff," he greeted them with false conviviality. "May I present my daughter, Rebecca?" Rebecca Jenkins curtsied politely, her eyes curious as she regarded Katherine. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Morgan. Everyone's talking about the brave Eastern lady who's taken over the Rocking M." "Brave or foolish, depending on who you ask," Katherine replied with a self-deprecating smile. "Brave," Matthew stated firmly. Jenkins laughed. "My daughter is too polite to say it, but stubborn might be the word some are using. Rebecca, why don't you ask the sheriff for a dance? I'd like a word with Miss Morgan." Matthew hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave Katherine alone with Jenkins. She gave him a reassuring nod, and he reluctantly offered his arm to Rebecca, leading her to the dance floor while keeping a watchful eye on Jenkins. "You've made an impression on our sheriff," Jenkins observed, watching Matthew with narrowed eyes. "He's never shown much interest in settling down before." "Is there something specific you wish to discuss, Mr. Jenkins?" Katherine asked, unwilling to engage in gossip. Jenkins turned his attention back to her. "I'm concerned about you, Miss Morgan. Running a ranch isn't like managing a household. It's dangerous work." "So I've been told repeatedly, yet here I stand." "For now," Jenkins agreed. "But there's trouble brewing. Cattle prices are falling, and water's getting scarce. The small ranchers will be hit hardest." "Is that why you're so eager to acquire my creek?" Jenkins' expression hardened. "That creek has always been a point of contention. Your uncle understood the natural way of things: the strongest survive, the weak perish. Yet he never sold to you." "Joseph was sentimental. You strike me as more practical." Jenkins leaned closer. "My offer increases by $500. Consider it carefully. No one would blame you for returning east with a tidy sum." "Good evening, Mr. Jenkins," Katherine replied coldly, turning away from him. As she walked toward the refreshment table, she caught sight of Matthew watching her, concern evident in his expression even as he continued dancing with Rebecca. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them, understanding perhaps, or something deeper. The attack came 3 days later. Katherine was awakened in the dead of night by Walter's urgent pounding on her door. "Fire," he shouted. "The north pasture." Katherine threw on clothes and boots, rushing outside to see an orange glow illuminating the distant hills. The dry summer grass would burn quickly, threatening both cattle and grazing land. "Saddle the horses," she ordered, her mind racing, "and bring every water bucket we have." The next hours passed in a blur of smoke, heat, and desperate work. Walter directed their small crew of hired hands while Katherine worked alongside them, beating back flames with wet blankets and digging fire breaks in the parched earth. By dawn, they had contained the blaze, saving most of the cattle and limiting damage to a few acres. Katherine sat exhausted on the charred ground, her face streaked with soot, lungs burning from smoke, when Matthew rode up with several townsmen. "We saw the smoke from town," he explained, dismounting quickly and kneeling beside her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, too tired for words. Matthew's expression darkened as he surveyed the blackened landscape. "This wasn't an accident." "Jenkins?" Katherine asked, finding her voice. "Can't prove it," Matthew replied grimly, "but the timing is suspicious." Walter joined them, his weathered face grave. "Found tracks heading west, toward the Double J." Matthew helped Katherine to her feet, his touch gentle but his eyes hard with anger. "I'll handle this." "No," Katherine said firmly. "If we can't prove it was Jenkins, confronting him will only escalate the situation." She looked around at the scorched earth and weary ranch hands. "We need to focus on recovery." Matthew studied her face, grudging respect mingling with frustration in his expression. "You're right, but I'm posting deputies out here until further notice." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a wagon from town. To Katherine's surprise, several women climbed down, led by Rebecca Jenkins, all carrying baskets of food and medical supplies. "We came to help," Rebecca explained, approaching Katherine with genuine concern. "It's what neighbors do." Katherine was touched by the gesture, especially coming from Jenkins' daughter. "Thank you." Rebecca lowered her voice. "I heard my father talking with his foreman last night. I don't have proof, but—" "It's all right," Katherine assured her. "We'll manage." As the women distributed food and tended to minor burns, Katherine noticed Matthew watching her with an unreadable expression. When their work was done and others had dispersed, he sought her out, finding her at the edge of the burned pasture, staring at the damaged land. "You're not giving up," he said. "It wasn't a question." "No. Even though this is likely just the beginning." Katherine turned to face him. "Would you? If this were your land, your dream?" Matthew stepped closer. "Katherine, I admire your courage, but Jenkins won't stop. When he can't intimidate you, he'll try to ruin you financially. He has friends at the bank, connections with cattle buyers. Then he'll find other banks, other buyers." "It might not be enough." Matthew's voice softened. "There are other options." Katherine stiffened. "If you're suggesting I sell—" "No," Matthew took her hands in his touch unexpectedly tender. "I'm suggesting a partnership." "Partnership?" Katherine echoed, confused. Matthew's blue eyes held hers steadily. "I've saved enough to buy into the ranch. Together, we'd be stronger against Jenkins. 2 owners instead of 1, with my badge providing some added protection." Katherine withdrew her hands, hurt and disappointment flooding her. "I don't need rescuing, Sheriff." "That's not what I'm proposing," Matthew replied, frustration edging his voice. "This isn't about protecting you. It's about," he broke off, running a hand through his hair in agitation. "About what?" "About us," he finally said. "I think you know there's something between us, Katherine. Something worth exploring." Katherine's heart raced at his words, but pride and independence warred with her emerging feelings. "I came west to prove I could stand on my own, not to replace one man's protection with another's." "I'm not offering protection," Matthew insisted. "I'm offering partnership, in the ranch and perhaps, eventually, in life." The rawness of his admission stunned her into silence. Matthew's expression closed. "Think about it." He turned to leave, then paused. "Jenkins will make another move soon. Whatever you decide about us, be careful." True to Matthew's prediction, Jenkins' next attack was financial. The bank called in Uncle Joseph's outstanding loans, giving Katherine 30 days to repay or forfeit the property. The cattle buyer who had promised to purchase her steers suddenly withdrew his offer, citing quality concerns. Katherine worked feverishly to find alternatives, riding to neighboring towns to meet with other bankers and buyers. Walter managed the ranch in her absence, keeping the repairs moving forward despite dwindling funds. It was during one such trip that Katherine encountered Rebecca Jenkins again, this time at a dress shop in the next town over. "Miss Morgan," Rebecca greeted her with genuine warmth. "How is the ranch recovering?" "Slowly but surely," Katherine replied, not wanting to reveal the extent of her troubles. Rebecca glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "My father is determined to have your water rights. He's convinced the banker to call in your loans." "I suspected as much." "There's more," Rebecca continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's arranged for cattle rustlers to hit your north pasture tomorrow night. I couldn't let that happen without warning you." Katherine stared at the young woman, shocked by both the information and Rebecca's willingness to betray her father. "Why are you telling me this?" Rebecca's expression turned sad. "My father wasn't always this way. Greed and power have changed him. What he's doing to you is wrong." "Thank you," Katherine said sincerely. "You're taking a risk." Rebecca smiled wryly. "Perhaps we're both braver than people think." Armed with Rebecca's warning, Katherine returned to the ranch and immediately sent for Matthew. They gathered in the kitchen with Walter, planning their strategy as night fell. "We'll need to catch them in the act," Matthew explained. "Word against Jenkins isn't enough, but if we can tie the rustlers directly to him." "I'll position our hands around the pasture," Walter suggested. "We can be ready when they come." Matthew nodded. "I'll bring deputies. We'll surround them before they know what's happening." Katherine listened to their plans, a kernel of an idea forming in her mind. What if we let them take the cattle? Both men stared at her in disbelief. "Hear me out," she continued. "If we stop them at our ranch, we have rustlers but no clear connection to Jenkins. But if we let them leave with the cattle and follow them, they might lead us directly to Jenkins," Matthew finished, admiration dawning in his eyes. "It's risky," Walter cautioned. "We could lose the herd." "Not if we're careful," Katherine argued, "and it's our best chance to expose Jenkins once and for all." After much discussion, they agreed to her plan. The following night, Katherine found herself crouched in the shadows with Matthew, watching as dark figures quietly rounded up cattle in the moonlight. "5 men," Matthew whispered. "More than I expected." Katherine's heart pounded with fear and anticipation. The rustlers worked efficiently, gathering the small herd and driving them toward the western boundary, toward Jenkins' land. Once the rustlers and cattle had a sufficient head start, Matthew signaled the deputies and ranch hands who had been hidden nearby. They mounted their horses and followed at a distance, careful to remain unseen. The trail was clear in the bright moonlight, leading directly to a box canyon on the edge of the Double J Ranch. As they watched from a ridge above, the rustlers herded the cattle into the canyon where several more men waited. "Jenkins," Matthew identified the burly figure issuing orders. "We've got him." The lawmen and ranch hands moved into position, surrounding the canyon entrance. On Matthew's signal, they rode in, guns drawn. "Jenkins," Matthew's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "You're under arrest for cattle rustling." Chaos erupted as the rustlers scrambled for weapons. Gunshots split the night air. Katherine watched in horror as Matthew exchanged fire with Jenkins' men, fear for his safety nearly overwhelming her. When the brief but intense firefight ended, 2 rustlers lay wounded, and Jenkins stood with his hands raised, fury contorting his features. "This proves nothing, Holloway," he spat. "I was simply recovering strays that wandered onto my property." "Save it for the judge," Matthew replied, dismounting to handcuff him. "Your men will testify to save their own skins." Katherine guided her horse forward, facing Jenkins directly. "It's over, Mr. Jenkins. You've lost?" Jenkins glared at her with undisguised hatred. "This isn't the end." "Yes," Katherine said firmly, "it is." With Jenkins awaiting trial and his hired men scattered, the threats to the Rockingham finally subsided. The bank, faced with evidence of collusion in Jenkins' schemes, extended Katherine's loans with favorable terms. The cattle market improved as fall approached, allowing her to sell steers at a fair price. The ranch flourished under Katherine's determined management and Walter's experienced guidance. By the time the first snow dusted the distant mountains, the Rockingham stood transformed, fences mended, buildings repaired, and a modest profit secured. Katherine found Matthew on her porch one crisp evening, hat in hands, expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "The ranch looks good," he said by way of greeting. "You've proven everyone wrong." "Not everyone," Katherine replied with a small smile. "You believed in me from the beginning, in your own way." Matthew stepped closer. "I've come about that partnership we discussed." Katherine's heart skipped. "The ranch is stable now. I don't need a financial partner." "I know." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "That's not the partnership I'm interested in anymore." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I love you, Katherine Morgan. I have since that first day when you rode into town with your chin held high, looking like you could take on the world." Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Matthew, I'm not asking you to give up your independence or your dreams," he continued earnestly. "I'm asking to share them with you, to build something together that's stronger than what either of us could create alone." Katherine stepped into his embrace, all the feelings she'd been guarding flowing freely at last. "I love you too." His lips found hers in a kiss that spoke of passion and promise, of battles fought and won, of a future stretching before them as vast and beautiful as the western sky. When they finally parted, Matthew smiled down at her. "Partners, then?" Katherine nodded, joy filling her heart. Partners, in everything. As twilight deepened around the Rockingham ranch, Katherine knew she had found her true home, not just in this wild, beautiful land, but in the arms of a man who valued her strength as much as her heart. The challenges would continue, as they did for all who carved a life from the frontier, but they would face them together, a partnership forged in adversity and sealed with love, their own perfect ending in an imperfect world.